"Miss Brooks, your employment has been terminated." Savannah Brooks froze. "What?" The order came directly from Mr. Moretti. "There must be a mistake." "I'm sorry. There wasn't." For 7 months, the curvy rehabilitation caregiver had been the only person capable of making Dominic Moretti complete every painful therapy session doctors believed he would never survive. She had argued with him, laughed at him, and stubbornly refused to fear the man everyone else treated like a king. Now security wouldn't even allow her through the front entrance. Then the elevator doors slid open. Dominic Moretti stepped out. Exceptionally handsome. Chairman of a multi-billion-dollar empire. Secret ruler of one of the world's most feared mafia organizations. He looked directly into Savannah's eyes, then walked past her as if she had never existed. No explanation. No goodbye. Only one question remained. What had the cold Mafia Boss seen the night before that made him erase the only woman he had ever trusted? Savannah Brooks stood outside the Moretti estate long after the gates had closed behind her. The cardboard box in her hands contained little more than a notebook, a pair of therapy gloves, several handwritten rehabilitation schedules, and the coffee mug one of the kitchen staff had given her during her first month. 7 months of daily routines had somehow been reduced to a few ordinary belongings. She still couldn't understand it. Dominic Moretti never made emotional decisions. Cold? Yes. Demanding? Always. Unreasonable? Occasionally. But never impulsive. If he had ordered her dismissal without explanation, then he believed he had a reason. That thought hurt even more. She replayed every conversation from the past week. Had she pushed him too hard during therapy? Had she overlooked an injury? Had she accidentally disclosed something confidential? No answer made sense. Determined to hear the truth directly from him, Savannah called his private assistant. No response. She sent a short text. Nothing. She emailed a formal request asking for a professional exit meeting. Hours later, the reply contained only a single sentence. Mr. Moretti has no further need for your services. No signature. No explanation. No invitation to speak. Only another closed door. Inside the estate, the atmosphere changed almost immediately. The physical therapists who rotated through consultations noticed it first. The rehabilitation gym, once filled with sarcastic arguments and reluctant laughter, had become painfully quiet. Meals were served exactly on time, yet most of them returned untouched. The household staff exchanged uneasy glances whenever Dominic entered a room. He gave orders with his usual calm voice. He attended meetings, signed contracts, held video conferences with international executives. Nothing about his schedule appeared unusual. Yet everyone sensed the difference. The mansion no longer felt alive. One afternoon, the head chef quietly sighed while preparing another untouched lunch. "I've cooked for Mr. Moretti for nearly 12 years, he whispered to one of the housekeepers. "I've never seen him finish vegetables until Miss Brooks bullied him into eating them." The housekeeper smiled sadly. "And now no one dares tell him to." Another employee folded fresh towels in the rehabilitation room before suddenly stopping. Savannah's handwritten motivational notes still decorated the whiteboard. 5 more steps today. No excuses. You can glare at me after you finish. No one had the courage to erase them. Even the security guards noticed the change. Every morning at exactly 9, they still found themselves glancing toward the front entrance, expecting the familiar sight of Savannah arriving with an oversized tote bag, 2 cups of coffee, and an impossible amount of optimism. She never came. Dominic noticed everything. He noticed the untouched therapy equipment. He noticed that no one argued with him anymore when he skipped stretching exercises. No one stole his phone to force him to rest.
No one rolled their eyes whenever he acted like the most stubborn billionaire in the country. The silence should have pleased him. Instead, it followed him into every room. Twice he picked up his phone. Twice he searched for Savannah's contact. Twice he locked the screen again. What was there to say? He had already seen everything he needed to see. A smiling woman. A velvet ring box. Happy tears. A warm embrace meant for another man. Whatever future Savannah had chosen, it clearly didn't include him. Across the city, Savannah finally accepted that Dominic would never explain his decision. With quiet dignity, she signed a contract with a respected rehabilitation center that had been trying to recruit her for years. Her first day was only 3 mornings away. She told herself it was simply another job, another patient, another beginning. But as she packed away the notebook filled with Dominic's rehabilitation progress, she paused when a loose page slipped onto the floor. Written in her own handwriting were the words she had once taped beside his treadmill. Recovery begins the moment you decide not to quit. For the first time since being dismissed, Savannah wondered if those words were no longer meant for Dominic. Perhaps they were meant for her. When Savannah Brooks first arrived at the Moretti estate, she had already been warned 3 times before walking through the front door. Don't argue with him. Don't ask personal questions. And whatever you do, don't tell him what to do. By the end of her first hour, she had broken every single rule. Dominic Moretti sat in his wheelchair, with the patience of a man enduring an unnecessary inconvenience. His injury had left him unable to walk without assistance, yet his greatest obstacle wasn't physical pain. It was pride. Savannah studied the rehabilitation chart before looking directly at him. "So," she said calmly, "are you planning to recover, or are you planning to scare every therapist until someone lies and says you're cured?" Dominic slowly raised one eyebrow. "I was told you were highly qualified." "I am. You seem unusually brave." "No," she smiled. "I just don't get paid enough to be intimidated." For the first time since his accident, someone inside the room failed to lower their eyes when he stared at them. The silence stretched between them. Then Dominic folded his arms. "I've decided not to exercise today." Savannah nodded thoughtfully. "That's unfortunate. You accept my decision?" "Of course." She closed the therapy folder. "I'll simply report that one of the country's most powerful businessmen was defeated by 3 resistance bands." His expression hardened. "I wasn't defeated." "No?" She glanced around the room, as if searching for an invisible opponent. "I apologize. Perhaps the treadmill bullied you instead." A housekeeper standing outside nearly laughed out loud before catching herself. Dominic glared. Savannah waited. Finally, with obvious irritation, he pushed himself toward the rehabilitation equipment. "You are incredibly annoying." "I've been called worse." Within minutes, she was counting repetitions while he complained through every movement. Again. "I've already done 10. I counted 8. You counted incorrectly. I have a degree. I own hospitals." "Wonderful." She folded her arms. "Maybe one of them teaches mathematics." To everyone's astonishment, Dominic completed all 10 repetitions. That became their routine. Every morning he invented a new excuse. "My shoulder hurts." "Then we'll exercise your legs." "I have an important meeting." "Excellent. Walking into it would impress your shareholders." "I didn't sleep." "Perfect. Physical therapy helps fatigue." "No." "Yes." "No." Still yes. The staff soon discovered something extraordinary. Dominic refused almost everyone, yet he never cancelled Savannah's sessions. He complained through every appointment, threatened to replace her twice a week, criticized her coffee, mocked her motivational speeches, and somehow, he never asked for another caregiver. Weeks passed. The wheelchair became a cane. The cane became slow, determined steps. Every milestone arrived with another argument. One rainy afternoon, Dominic managed to walk across the rehabilitation room without assistance. The staff waited for applause. Savannah simply looked at him. "Your posture is terrible." Dominic blinked. "I just walked 20 feet. You slouched for at least 5 of them." "I almost collapsed. But you didn't." She handed him a bottle of water. "Now do it again." He stared at her in disbelief. "You enjoy this?" "I enjoy progress." "I think you enjoy torturing billionaires." She grinned. "That's just a professional bonus." Something unexpected happened over those 7 months. The conversations slowly stopped feeling like therapy. Sometimes they argued about books, sometimes about music, sometimes about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Dominic insisted it was unacceptable. Savannah claimed life was too short to fear fruit. One afternoon he discovered she had secretly replaced the expensive gourmet chocolate in his office with sugar-free protein bars. "You committed theft. I committed nutritional improvement. My lawyers will hear about this. They'll probably thank me." Even the employees began measuring the time of day by the sound of their voices. If laughter echoed from the rehabilitation room, everyone relaxed. It meant Mr. Moretti was having a good day. What neither of them recognized was how naturally they had become part of each other's lives. Savannah no longer knocked before entering the therapy room. Dominic no longer pretended to dislike her company. She remembered every medication schedule without checking notes. He remembered exactly how she took her coffee and quietly instructed the kitchen to prepare it before she arrived each morning. No one mentioned these little acts of care. Not even them. Because somewhere between stubborn exercises, sarcastic arguments, and countless shared mornings, the coldest man in the city had stopped counting the days until his recovery. Instead, without realizing it, he had begun counting the hours until Savannah walked through the door again. Dominic Moretti never believed jealousy could control him. Fear controlled other people. Greed controlled businessmen. Pride controlled politicians. But Dominic had spent decades disciplining every emotion that could become a weakness. Or so he believed. It happened on an ordinary Thursday evening. His board meeting had ended earlier than expected, and instead of returning directly to the estate, he instructed his driver to take a quieter route through the city. He wanted a few minutes without phone calls, bodyguards, or endless decisions. As the car slowed beside an upscale Italian restaurant, a familiar laugh drifted through the open window. He turned instinctively. Savannah. She sat near the restaurant's front window, wearing a simple navy blue dress he had never seen before. Her hair rested loosely over her shoulders, and without the white medical uniform she wore every day, she looked less like the woman who stubbornly ordered him through rehabilitation, and more like someone finally allowing herself to enjoy an evening for herself. For reasons he couldn't explain, Dominic smiled, until he noticed she wasn't alone. Across from her sat a man close to her own age. Well-dressed, relaxed, kind-looking. The stranger leaned forward as they talked, listening with genuine attention. Dominic remained inside the car. He told himself he was only making sure she was safe. Nothing more. Then he saw Savannah wipe tears from her eyes. His heartbeat faltered. The man reached across the table, not romantically, but gently, and placed a small velvet box into her hands. Dominic's entire body stiffened. She stared at it in disbelief. Her fingers trembled as she slowly opened the lid. Even from outside, the unmistakable gleam of a ring caught the restaurant lights. A ring. Dominic felt the word echo through his mind. Savannah covered her mouth as fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. The man smiled. She smiled back. Then, without hesitation, she stood and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't a brief, awkward embrace. It was warm, grateful, deeply emotional. Dominic looked away. He didn't wait to hear another word. Drive. His driver hesitated. "Sir?" I said drive. The vehicle pulled away from the curb, leaving the restaurant behind. But the image remained. The ring, her tears, her smile, her embrace. During the entire drive home, Dominic said nothing. His security team assumed he was reviewing business matters. No one realized the man feared by thousands was quietly losing an argument with his own heart. By midnight, he had convinced himself of a story that felt painfully logical. Savannah had finally met someone who belonged in her world. A man without enemies, without blood on his hands, without a criminal empire hidden beneath billion-dollar boardrooms. Someone who could wake beside her without bodyguards outside the bedroom. Someone who didn't carry violence wherever he went. For the first time in years, Dominic didn't envy another man's wealth. He envied his ordinary life. He remembered every time Savannah had laughed during therapy. Every cup of coffee they had shared. Every sarcastic argument that somehow became the best part of his mornings. Had he imagined all of it? Perhaps she had always seen him exactly as she claimed. Only as a patient. Only as a responsibility. Only as another broken man she had helped heal before moving on. The realization hurt far more than any injury he had survived. Shortly after dawn, Dominic entered his office. His assistant stood waiting with the day's schedule. "Cancel Miss Brooks' therapy session." The assistant frowned. "Sir, today's your mobility assessment. It won't be necessary. Should I reschedule her for tomorrow?" Dominic stared silently through the window before answering. "No." The single word sounded colder than intended. Several long seconds passed. Then came the order that surprised everyone. "Prepare her final payment." The assistant blinked. "Sir, are you dismissing Miss Brooks?" "Immediately." "May I ask the reason?" "No." He signed the termination documents without reading them a second time. His handwriting remained perfectly steady. Only after the assistant quietly left the office did Dominic close his eyes. He had spent 7 months rebuilding his body. One night had been enough to convince him his heart was beyond repair. What he never realized was that he had walked away before hearing the truth. And sometimes, the greatest tragedies are not created by lies. They are created by the stories people invent to protect themselves from being hurt first. Savannah's first month at the Riverside Rehabilitation Center was everything she had hoped for. The patients were grateful. The staff respected her. Every day she helped someone take another painful step toward independence. From the outside, it looked as though she had moved on. Inside, however, a small part of her still wondered what she had done wrong. She stopped herself from checking old messages. Stopped expecting Dominic to call. Stopped inventing reasons for his silence. Or at least, she tried. One afternoon, the center's director gathered the staff together. "We've received another anonymous donation," she announced. "The amount is enough to replace all of our outdated rehabilitation equipment." Everyone applauded. Savannah smiled with the others. Whoever the donor was had changed dozens of patients' lives. She never imagined she already knew his name. Across the city, Dominic signed the transfer without allowing his foundation to receive any public recognition. No press release, he instructed. No interviews. His financial director looked confused. "The foundation usually announces donations of this size. Not this one." Dominic ended the meeting before anyone could ask another question. Helping the rehabilitation center wasn't charity. It was guilt. He told himself that if Savannah could build new lives for strangers, then the least he could do was make her work a little easier. He still refused to see her, until fate decided otherwise. It happened on a rainy Saturday morning. Dominic had reluctantly agreed to attend a community health fair sponsored by the Moretti Foundation. He expected speeches, photographs, endless handshakes. Instead, as he rounded a corner between the rehabilitation booths, he nearly collided with Savannah. Both of them stopped. For a moment, neither spoke. "You walk much better now," Savannah said first, slipping naturally back into her professional voice. "You noticed." "I notice everything." An awkward silence followed. Then she looked down. "You still lean slightly to the left." Dominic sighed. "I was hoping you'd forgotten that. I never forget bad posture." Despite everything that had happened, they almost smiled. Almost. A volunteer interrupted them before either could continue. "Excuse me," the young woman said, carrying 2 heavy boxes. "Could someone help me?" Without thinking, both Savannah and Dominic reached for the same box. Their hands bumped. They pulled away at exactly the same moment. The volunteer blinked between them. "You two married?" Both answered instantly. "No," the volunteer laughed. "Could have fooled me." She walked away before either of them could respond. For several seconds, they stood in embarrassed silence. Finally, Savannah cleared her throat. "Thank you for helping. It wasn't difficult." "No," she offered a polite smile. "I meant helping the volunteer." She left before he could answer. Dominic watched her disappear into the crowd. He realized he had just spent 5 minutes speaking to the woman he couldn't stop thinking about, and had failed to ask the only question that mattered. Why had she cried that night? Meanwhile, another pair of eyes had been watching everything. Vivienne Laurent lowered her coffee cup with quiet satisfaction. She had admired Dominic for years, not openly, never foolishly. She simply believed someone of his status deserved a woman who matched the image the world expected. Elegant, sophisticated, perfect. Certainly not a caregiver the tabloids would describe as plus size. Later that week, Vivienne arranged a casual conversation with Savannah after another charity meeting. "I hope you're doing well," Vivienne said warmly. "I am, thank you. I'm glad." She hesitated, just long enough to sound sincere. "You know, people often misunderstand men like Dominic." Savannah remained silent. "They admire kindness," Vivienne continued softly. "But they usually marry women who fit their world." The words landed gently, almost kindly, which somehow made them hurt even more. "I don't know what you mean. I only mean," Vivienne smiled sympathetically. "Don't mistake gratitude for love." Savannah forced a polite smile before excusing herself. She told herself the conversation meant nothing. Yet that night, standing before her bedroom mirror, she caught herself studying the reflection she had spent years trying to accept. Curvy, soft, beautiful in ways she rarely allowed herself to believe. Then Vivienne's words echoed again. "A man like Dominic would never truly choose someone like you." Miles away, Dominic sat alone in his office. A photograph from the health fair rested on his desk. Dozens of volunteers filled the frame. Savannah appeared only in the background, laughing with an elderly patient. She wasn't looking at the camera. She wasn't posing. She was simply being herself. Dominic found himself smiling despite everything. Then he quietly turned the photograph face down, because the more often fate placed Savannah back into his life, the harder it became to believe letting her go had been the right decision. Nearly 6 weeks after Savannah left the Moretti estate, Dominic attended a fundraising luncheon for a children's hospital. Normally he would have delegated the event. Lately, however, work had become the only reliable distraction from thoughts he refused to entertain. As he prepared to leave, a familiar voice stopped him. "Mr. Moretti." Dominic turned. The man approaching him looked strangely familiar. Dark hair, calm expression. Early 40s. It took only a second. The restaurant. The night Savannah disappeared from his life. The man extended his hand politely. "I'm Nathan Brooks." Dominic accepted the handshake, though every muscle in his body tightened. "I've wanted to thank you personally." Dominic frowned. "For what?" "The anonymous donation to Riverside Rehabilitation Center." Nathan smiled warmly. Savannah suspected it might have come from someone who understood how important rehabilitation really is. Dominic remained silent. Nathan continued. She still doesn't know it was you, does she? No, I thought not. Something in Nathan's tone carried no rivalry, no triumph, only quiet gratitude. It wasn't the voice of a man protecting a romantic relationship. Curiosity replaced suspicion. You know Savannah well. Nathan laughed softly. I certainly hope so. I'm her cousin. Dominic felt the ground disappear beneath him. My late aunt raised both of us after my parents died. Savannah has always been more like a younger sister than a cousin. For several long seconds, Dominic couldn't speak. Every assumption he had built over the past weeks began collapsing one after another. The dinner. Nathan's smile faded gently. You saw us? Dominic gave the slightest nod. Nathan sighed. I suppose that explains why she came home so confused afterward. Confused, not happy, not newly engaged, confused. The ring wasn't an engagement ring. Nathan reached into his jacket pocket and carefully removed a photograph. It showed Savannah standing beside an older woman with the exact same warm smile. My aunt. He paused. Her mother. Dominic studied the picture quietly. Before my surgery, I wanted to return something that belonged to Savannah. Nathan took another slow breath. The ring had been in a bank safety deposit box since her mother passed away. Dominic remembered the velvet case, the tears, the smile. I'd just been diagnosed with terminal heart disease. The words landed like a blow. The surgeons believed I had a chance. Nathan's expression remained calm, but they also told me to prepare for the worst. He looked toward the hospital entrance where families came and went. My daughter Emily is only 10. If the operation failed, his voice caught briefly. I wanted Savannah to become Emily's legal guardian. Dominic closed his eyes. Every image from that night returned. The tears. Not tears of romance. Tears of fear. The embrace. Not the embrace of lovers. The embrace of family, preparing for the possibility of goodbye. I left before. Nathan finished the sentence for him. Before hearing any of it. Dominic lowered his gaze. I did. For the first time in years, the man feared by entire criminal organizations looked genuinely ashamed. I dismissed her the next morning. Nathan stared at him in disbelief. You what? I believed. Dominic struggled to finish. I believed she'd found someone she deserved. Nathan let out a slow breath. Mr. Moretti. His voice remained remarkably gentle. Do you know what Savannah said after she lost her job? Dominic silently shook his head. She blamed herself. The words struck harder than any accusation. She replayed every therapy session, every conversation, every decision. She couldn't understand what she'd done wrong. Nathan looked directly into Dominic's eyes. The one thing she never imagined. Was that the man she respected most simply refused to ask her one question? Why? That single word echoed painfully inside Dominic's mind. Why were you crying? Who was that man? What was the ring? 3 simple questions. Questions he had been too frightened to ask. Instead, he had chosen silence, because silence required less courage than the possibility of hearing an answer he feared. Nathan carefully returned the old photograph to his pocket. My surgery was successful. A faint smile crossed his face. I'm still here. So is Emily. He hesitated. But Savannah. His expression softened. I'm not sure she's fully recovered from losing someone she trusted. Dominic remained standing long after Nathan walked away. For years, people had called him ruthless because he could make impossible decisions without hesitation. Now he understood something far worse. The cruelest decision of his life had not been made with anger. It had been made with certainty. The certainty that his own fears were facts. The certainty that jealousy saw the truth. As he stood outside the hospital, Dominic finally admitted what he had refused to face. His greatest enemy had never been another mafia family. It had never been betrayal. It had never even been violence. It had been the story he invented, because believing the worst seemed easier than risking hope. And now the only woman who had ever taught him how to stand again was the one person he had no idea how to face.
The annual Moretti Foundation Charity Gala attracted exactly the kind of people Dominic usually tolerated rather than enjoyed. Corporate executives, government officials, medical researchers, international journalists. This year's event celebrated one group above all others: healthcare professionals who had transformed lives through rehabilitation and long-term patient care. Savannah attended only because her director insisted. "You deserve the recognition," she had said. Savannah disagreed. She had never cared about awards. Helping people walk again had always been enough. She arrived in a deep emerald evening gown that hugged her soft curves with quiet elegance. She still felt the familiar flicker of insecurity as conversations paused when she entered the ballroom. Years of experience had taught her that people often looked twice, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with judgment. She had learned not to ask which one came first. Vivienne Laurent noticed her almost immediately. She crossed the ballroom with effortless confidence. "I didn't expect to see you here." Magda nominated our rehabilitation team. "Of course," Vivienne smiled politely. "I'm sure tonight will be memorable." Before Savannah could reply, the ballroom lights dimmed. The Master of Ceremonies welcomed everyone before inviting the evening's final speaker to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the chairman of the Moretti Foundation, Mr. Dominic Moretti." Polite applause filled the room. Dominic walked to the podium with his usual calm composure. Tailored tuxedo, measured steps, unreadable expression. The audience expected another speech about charitable investment and healthcare initiatives. Instead, Dominic unfolded a single sheet of paper, then quietly folded it again. He looked across the room. His eyes found Savannah almost instantly. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the polished confidence expected from one of the world's most influential businessmen. "Tonight, I was asked to honor extraordinary healthcare professionals." He paused. "But before I honor anyone, I need to admit something." The ballroom fell silent. I once believed strength meant never making mistakes. I was wrong. Several executives exchanged puzzled glances. Reporters lowered their cameras only to raise them again. Dominic continued. "Several months ago, I allowed jealousy to become certainty. I judged someone I deeply respected without asking a single question. I chose silence instead of trust. I hurt an innocent person. No one moved. Even the waitstaff stood perfectly still." Dominic slowly stepped away from the podium, not toward the audience, toward Savannah. Every pair of eyes followed him. He stopped only a few feet away. For the first time, anyone in that room could remember. Dominic Moretti looked genuinely vulnerable. "I owe this woman an apology." Savannah stared at him in stunned disbelief. He continued before she could speak. "The strongest person I have ever met isn't remembered because of her appearance." He shook his head. "She's unforgettable because she walks into broken lives every day, and somehow convinces people they are still worth fighting for." His voice grew quieter. "When I couldn't stand, she refused to let me surrender. When I hid behind power, she treated me like an ordinary human being. And when fear convinced me to believe the worst, I repaid her kindness with suspicion." A painful silence settled across the ballroom. Dominic looked directly into Savannah's eyes. "I cannot erase what I did. I cannot ask you to forget it. But I can tell the truth, in front of everyone." He drew one slow breath. "I was never ashamed of you. I was ashamed that I believed someone as kind as you could never choose a man like me." Savannah felt tears gathering before she realized she was crying. For months she had believed the opposite, that she had never been enough, that perhaps Vivienne had been right, that a woman shaped like her could never belong beside someone the entire world admired. As if sensing her thoughts, Dominic spoke again. "If anyone here remembers Savannah Brooks, I hope it won't be because people called her plus size. I hope they'll remember the woman who taught the most feared man in this room how to stand, and how to become someone worthy of standing beside her." The ballroom remained silent, not uncomfortable, respectful. Then, somewhere near the back, a nurse began applauding. Another joined, then another. Within seconds, the entire room rose to its feet. The standing ovation lasted far longer than Dominic's speech. Not for him, for Savannah. She looked around the ballroom in disbelief. Doctors, patients, executives, journalists, people who had never met her. They weren't looking at her body. They were looking at her with gratitude, recognition, respect. For the first time since she was a little girl, Savannah realized something she had spent decades struggling to believe. The right person doesn't make you feel beautiful despite your insecurities. The right person makes those insecurities lose their power. When the applause finally softened, Dominic spoke only one last sentence, quiet enough for her alone. "Losing you taught me that fear can destroy love faster than hatred ever could." Savannah searched his face. For the first time since the morning she had been dismissed. She no longer saw the untouchable Mafia Boss. She simply saw a flawed man, one who had finally found the courage to tell the truth. And somehow, that truth began healing both of them. Several months later, a modest brick building on the east side of the city welcomed its first patients. A simple sign above the entrance read, "Brooks Rehabilitation and Wellness Center." Savannah had built it, one careful step at a time. Long evenings, weekend consultations, small business loans, years of professional experience, and an unwavering belief that every patient deserved compassionate care, regardless of their financial situation. Many people assumed Dominic Moretti had financed the entire project. He hadn't. The only contribution he ever insisted on making was the same one offered by every other volunteer. His time. Every Saturday morning, the city's most feared Mafia Boss exchanged tailored suits for a plain navy polo shirt with the clinic's embroidered logo. He stacked therapy mats, sanitized equipment, helped elderly patients practice balance exercises, and accepted endless corrections from Savannah whenever he forgot proper lifting techniques. "You bent your knees too late," she reminded him one morning. Dominic sighed dramatically. "I knew coming here would involve criticism. It involves quality control. I own international corporations. And today you're carrying resistance bands. I've fallen very far." She laughed. "No, you've finally come down to earth." The staff smiled every time they watched them together. Nothing between them felt forced. There were no grand gestures, no expensive gifts, no attempts to erase the past. Trust had returned the same way Dominic had once learned to walk again, one careful step at a time. On a quiet autumn afternoon, Dominic helped an elderly patient complete her final rehabilitation session. The woman straightened proudly before hugging Savannah. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You did the hard work," Savannah replied warmly. I only reminded you that you could." The elderly woman turned toward Dominic with a knowing smile. "So, when did you fall in love with her?" The therapy room became unusually quiet. Several patients pretended not to listen. None of them succeeded. Dominic looked across the room. Savannah was adjusting a patient's shoulder brace, completely unaware that everyone was waiting for his answer. A gentle smile appeared on his face. "The day I realized," he paused, "I stopped seeing her body." His eyes never left Savannah, and started seeing the only place that ever felt like home. Savannah looked up. Their eyes met across the room. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to disappear. She walked toward him slowly. "So," she smiled through tears that no longer came from insecurity. "Does this mean you're finally admitting I was the better therapist?" Dominic chuckled. "I'll admit you were right." She folded her arms playfully. "About what?" "Everything. The resistance bands?" "Yes." "The vegetables?" "Unfortunately." "The terrible posture?" He sighed with theatrical defeat. "Especially the terrible posture." Savannah laughed so freely that several patients joined in without even knowing why. Then, without hesitation, she reached for his hand. This time, Dominic didn't fear what anyone else might think. He simply held hers. Not because she had healed his injured body, but because she had healed the lonely man hidden behind power, wealth, and fear. Years earlier, Savannah had believed no handsome man could ever truly choose someone like her. Standing beside Dominic, surrounded by patients whose lives they had changed together, she finally understood the truth. Real love doesn't begin when someone overlooks your imperfections. It begins when the right person sees all of you and never once wishes you were anyone else. For the first time in her life, Savannah Brooks no longer questioned whether she deserved to be loved. She simply accepted the hand that had finally learned how to hold hers with trust instead of fear. And together, they walked forward, not toward a perfect future, but toward one they would build